In the late 1400s, Europe had a ravenous appetite for spices. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were highly sought after, acting as a form of concentrated wealth. But moving these goods from the markets of Asia to a European dinner table meant navigating a massive, fragmented network of overland trade routes. Along those routes, two powers held all the leverage. The Republic of Venice and the various Middle Eastern empires maintained an absolute monopoly over the flow of goods. If a European nation wanted spices, they had to play by their rules and pay their prices. This chart shows the markup of those spices as they moved westward. Every time a shipment crossed a border or changed hands at a port, a new tax was applied. By the time a sack of pepper actually reached Western Europe, the price had inflated to staggering levels, draining the treasuries of buying nations to enrich the middlemen. If you look at Portugal, you see their specific problem. They were stuck at the extreme western edge of the continent, dead last in the supply chain, and completely locked out of this wealth. To survive economically, Portugal needed a way around the monopolies. They had to attempt what the rest of the world considered impossible, bypassing the land routes entirely to find a direct, unmapped path through the ocean to Asia. In 1497, King Manuel I of Portugal committed to a radical solution. He authorized a fleet to sail south, entirely around the unmapped southern tip of the African continent, hoping the ocean connected to the Indian spice markets. To lead this highly dangerous mission, the king selected Vasco da Gama, a minor nobleman and experienced mariner. On July 8, 1497, da Gama set sail from Lisbon. He commanded a fleet of 4 wooden ships and a crew of 170 men, steering straight into the unknown. Outfitting these newly built ships drained the royal treasury, and failure meant bankrupting the crown. Success, however, meant disrupting the entire global economy. The fleet initially made good progress, moving south along the West African coast. Soon, though, they hit a major geographical barrier: strong, contrary coastal winds that pushed against their bows and halted their advance. To bypass the headwinds, da Gama made a terrifying navigational choice. He ordered his ships to abandon the safety of the coastline and steered deep into the open ocean, hoping to catch a current known as the South Atlantic Westerlies. This sweeping detour took them out into the void for over 3 months. They sailed more than 10,000 kilometers without ever seeing land, marking by far the longest journey into the open ocean ever attempted in human history. The gamble paid off. By late November, the fleet finally made landfall, survived the treacherous currents, and rounded the southern tip of Africa, crossing into waters completely unknown to Europeans. Surviving the edge of the map didn't mean they were safe. The Portuguese had just dropped themselves into an existing, highly advanced Indian Ocean trade network, where they were viewed entirely as unwelcome interlopers. As the fleet moved up the East African coast, they encountered wealthy, Arab-controlled trading hubs like Mozambique and Mombasa. The locals quickly grew suspicious of these ragged Christian sailors offering paltry trade goods. Met with hostility, da Gama's crew resorted to piracy, looting unarmed merchant vessels and firing cannons into the cities in retaliation. They barely survived until they reached the friendlier port of Malindi, where they managed to hire a local Gujarati pilot. This pilot understood the seasonal monsoon winds, powerful, predictable weather patterns that blow across the Indian Ocean toward Asia in the summer. He used these winds to guide the Portuguese fleet the rest of the way. On May 20, 1498, the battered ships finally dropped anchor off the shores of Kozhikode, India. After nearly a year at sea, the direct sea route to Asia was complete. The actual meeting, however, was a diplomatic disaster. Da Gama presented the local ruler, the Zamorin, with trivial gifts like hats and honey, which deeply insulted the wealthy king. To make matters worse, da Gama confidently entered a Hindu temple and fell to his knees, mistaking a statue of a local goddess for the Virgin Mary. The local Muslim merchants immediately recognized da Gama, not as a royal ambassador, but as an ordinary pirate. The highly anticipated first contact dissolved into a tense standoff, and da Gama fled the city by force, kidnapping several local fishermen on his way out. Eager to get home, da Gama made a fatal navigational error. He ignored local warnings about the monsoon wind patterns and ordered the fleet to set sail while the winds were still blowing onshore against them. Sailing with the summer winds, it had taken the fleet just 23 days to cross the Indian Ocean. Fighting against them on the return trip, it took more than 90 days. The long crossing was agonizing. Scurvy ravaged the crew, killing so many sailors that da Gama didn't have enough men left standing to manage the fleet. He was forced to scuttle one of his own ships, the São Rafael, off the African coast. The human arithmetic of the voyage was brutal. Of the 170 men who left Lisbon to connect the world, only about 55 survived the journey to see Portugal again. When da Gama arrived back in Lisbon in the summer of 1499, the massive casualties were overlooked. He was given a hero's welcome, showered with honors, and permanently immortalized in Portuguese national myth. The crown focused on the cargo. Even the tiny quantity of spices brought back on the remaining 2 ships proved that bypassing the overland monopolies was unimaginably profitable. To secure this wealth, Portugal pivoted aggressively. In 1502, King Manuel sent da Gama back to India, leading a heavily armed fleet of 15 warships, with explicit orders to force submission. Da Gama enacted brutal vengeance on Kozhikode. He bombarded the unfortified city for 2 days from the sea, and when a high priest was sent to negotiate, da Gama ordered the man's lips and ears cut off, replacing them with the sewn-on ears of a dog. The violence extended to anyone in his path. Off the Indian coast, da Gama intercepted a ship carrying over 400 Muslim pilgrims traveling from Mecca. After looting their wealth, he locked the passengers below deck and burned the ship, watching through a porthole as women held up their babies to beg for mercy. Vasco da Gama successfully shattered the old overland monopolies and opened a direct maritime route between Europe and Asia. But the foundation of this connected global economy was laid with extreme violence, sparking a centuries-long era of European imperialism.